When I first came up with the idea to make a long retrospective video about Nobuhiko Ôbayashi, I initially felt I was biting off more than I could chew. The process was indeed pretty grueling, but now that the video is released, I can say that I'm very happy with the result. With that said, I'm the type of person who likes to overturn as many stones as I possibly can, and there was definitely more content from Obayashi I didn't get a chance to cover the first time around. In this follow-up video, I will be covering Nobuhiko Ôbayashi's short films from the 60s and career directing commercials in the 70s, both of which I bypassed in my original video for time purposes. I will also be going over the information regarding the Obayashi feature films I was not able to find for viewing, as there was a larger amount than you may think. We're going in chronological order once again, beginning with his short films, followed by his commercials, and finally his features. We have quite a bit of content to cover once again, so without further hesitation, it's time to get a shovel and keep on digging. Obayashi began his career by making experimental short films on 8mm and 16mm cameras. It should be noted that while these are considered to be Nobuhiko Obayashi's earliest films, Obayashi was experimenting with animation and film equipment as early as the age of 6. IMDb does give the names of some of his earliest credits, including Memories of Sleep, Youth Clouds, King Kong, The Stupid Teacher, Popeye's Treasure Island, and Mr. T's Afternoon. I'm not joking about that last one. However, the ones I'm talking about are the ones that Obayashi filmed during his 20s between 1960 and 1968. While I was able to find videos for a lot of these shorts, the subtitles were a different matter. Thankfully, since most of these shorts are experimental and don't follow a cohesive story or have much dialogue anyway, it's not a complete loss. I can't figure out if Obayashi's first short was The Girl in the Picture or Dandanko, as they both came out in 1960 with unspecified filming dates. I'll start with talking about Dandanko. The story, if you can call it that, involves a woman and a child playing in a park. For a short film that doesn't have any dialogue or really much of a plot, Obayashi sure put a lot of effort into editing and camera work. I especially love when the kid bounces his ball and the camera takes the perspective of the ball. You can even trace some of his crazy techniques utilized in his later professional work all the way back to this film. Dandanko is also Obayashi's first co-directed effort with Akira Hirata, who is best known for, well, co-directing this short. Not much here in terms of narrative, but for an experimental film, it succeeds in what it sets out to accomplish. The Girl in the Picture is another short with no spoken dialogue. Instead, it's a silent film with its dialogue appearing as text on the screen. The story for this film is a little bit more comprehensible than Dandanko, and it even lays a lot of groundwork for many of the themes Obayashi would utilize in his later work, such as romance, loss, youth, and nostalgia. This short also holds significance as being the first Obayashi film to contrast color and black and white cinematography. This could have been a budgetary restraint given that color film was expensive back then, but regardless, the method really works here and you can see why he applied it to much of his later work. The Girl in the Picture also marks the first appearance of someone who would end up being a long-standing presence within Obayashi's career, as well as his personal life, his wife, Kyoko. In this film, she's credited under her maiden name Kyoko Hanyu. Is it a coincidence that Obayashi's first love story also starred the woman who would eventually become his wife? Perhaps, but it does add an extra layer of significance to the story. I definitely think this is an improvement over Dandanko and worth checking out for fans of the director. Thursday is another short which has no dialogue, which is good for me because there's not much to miss with no subtitles. The story involves a couple spending time around a creek when the woman announces her pregnancy. An odd thing about this film is the picture quality is for some reason worse than Obayashi's previous two films, despite being made after. I don't know why that would be. For me personally, I didn't find this short all that engaging. Not to say that it's bad, it's well made and does feature Obayashi's signature quality in terms of camera movements and editing, although it's not as outstanding as some of the other techniques found in his other short films. On the other hand, the music is great and the story does manage to have some emotional weight at times. Overall, this is an okay short, but it wouldn't be my first recommendation for Obayashi's early outings. Similarly to Dandanko, Remembrance is a film about a woman and her son who plays with a toy. Unlike Dandanko, this film has a much darker subtext as it involves the pair taking a walk around a graveyard. The woman has a very emotional experience visiting the grave of who I assume was her husband. Meanwhile, the son plays with his toy airplane, clearly commenting on the difference between adults and children when it comes to processing death. This is the first Obayashi film that features sound. There's still no dialogue, but there is actual sound effects and ambience instead of solely the score. However, the score is incredible in this film. Fun fact, the score for this film, as well as Thursday and The Girl in the Picture, were composed by Obayashi himself. I personally found this short to be the best one so far, and showcases Obayashi's improving skill set as he continues his filmmaking journey. Nakasendo is a plotless short featuring shots of Japanese countryside and architecture. Not really much to comment here other than the camera work and music, which are great as usual and help the film have a certain flow. We also do get brief shots of humans initially, which become more prevalent as the film continues. 16 minutes isn't much of a time commitment, so if any of that sounds interesting to you, then find yourself a copy and give it a watch. Onomichi is a collection of shots of the city of Onomichi, and that's about it. Like Nakasendo, there's not much to say about this one. The title says it all, and what you see is what you get. I will say these are beautiful shots of Onomichi that give a great sense of what the vibe of the city was in the 60s. It is also significant if you've seen a lot of Obayashi's films, as it lays the groundwork for a lot of the beautiful locations shown in many of the Onomichi-based stories. If you've got 20 minutes to spare, check it out and let the atmosphere of Onomichi soak in. Complexe is probably my personal favorite out of Obayashi's short films. The editing techniques, especially the stop-motion animation, make this not only the most impressive short in my opinion, but also the most thoroughly entertaining. The actors in the film look like they're having a lot of fun, even if the process of filming must have been very time-consuming. Complexe is the earliest short in this list to feature spoken dialogue, but it's only one line at the end, so it won't be a huge problem for non-Japanese speakers. You know, this whole not being able to find subtitles thing wasn't nearly as detrimental as I thought. Complexe introduces another new member of the Obayashi family onto the screen, Nobuhiko and Kyoko's daughter, Chigumi Obayashi. For those of you who are unaware, Obayashi asked his daughter what she thought would be scary when coming up for concepts in house. So in a way, we have Chigumi to thank for helping launch Obayashi's professional career in making features. I highly recommend Complexe as a great place to start when looking into Obayashi's early work. Emotion is the easiest of Obayashi's short films to find, as it is available in the Criterion release of House, with English subtitles. The opening credits say the short is dedicated to the French director Roger Vadim's film, Blood and Roses. Interestingly, the film's narration switches between Japanese, English, and French. Much like Complexe, Obayashi's frenetic energy and editing are fully realized here. The story is about a young woman traveling to Onomichi, meeting with a friend, and falling in love with a vampire, I think. Even with subtitles, Emotion is a hard film to follow. It operates on dream logic, and kind of like House, it feels innocent and nightmarish simultaneously. In a way, much of the tone Obayashi was going for in this short feels like it laid the groundwork for the trippy and haunting tone found in House. I could definitely see why this one in particular was paired with House on the Criterion release. If you have a copy of the Criterion but overlooked this short, it is definitely worth going back and discovering. Confession, also known under its longer title, Confession, A Guillotine Love Trip That Is Far Away, whatever that means, is the final fiction film on this list of shorts. There's quite a bit of spoken dialogue in Confession, so this is one of the few cases where a lack of English subtitles is actually somewhat detrimental to the experience of the film, which is unfortunate. That's not to say there is no merit to watching the film without subtitles, as it does feature the impressive technical aspects and fun experimentation found in Obayashi's other work. This is mostly a string of sequences involving people partaking in activities around Onomichi. Confession is 71 minutes long, making it the longest experimental film Obayashi made during this era. I don't even know if you could really consider it a short film at that point, but I digress. One thing to note about the Confession is that it's the first movie where Obayashi's wife is listed under the surname Kyoko Obayashi, meaning they must have got married between the release of Emotion and this film. These two stayed married until Nobuhiko Obayashi's death in 2020. Confession is definitely an intriguing movie and a fun experience, even if I wish I had the subtitles to get the full experience. Hopefully that happens eventually, but for now, it remains an interesting visual piece that's brisk and fun. Foreign Correspondent, The Case of a Filmmaker, is a short partial documentary film following the story of a Nordic designer who travels to Japan and meets Obayashi, who gives the designer inspiration. According to this article translated from Japanese, this was previously an unreleased short film that was screened at the Kyoto International Film Festival in 2020, after Obayashi's death. This is another short film without subtitles, which is really a problem, since almost the entire thing is narrated. The film quality here is much better than many of Obayashi's previous shorts, showing that Obayashi was finally getting to use more professional film equipment than the 8mm and 16mm cameras. I don't feel like I can really assess this short without proper subtitles, but still, it's cool that this finally saw the light of day after being unreleased for so many years. Also, it was really fun for me seeing Obayashi actually play a piano in this film, since he uses pianos so often for his scores. That about does it for Obayashi's short films. In retrospect, a lot of these shorts have really interesting filming techniques and themes which became commonplace in Obayashi's work. I'd recommend checking them out as more than a curiosity, as they do have a lot of merits to appreciate about them. IMDb lists credits for more of Obayashi's shorts after Foreign Correspondent, but I can't speak to the validity of most of these credits. I did manage to find this Kirin beer commercial, which is a full-blown musical number about beer production. Also, I highly doubt Obayashi created an introduction to Lonely Heart 15 years before the release of the actual film. It's possible these are miscredits or that most of these are commercials. Hell, it wouldn't be the first time IMDb led me down a wild goose chase. Hopefully we get more confirmation, but for now, let's delve into Obayashi's commercial career. At some point in the late 60s, Obayashi's experimental work was discovered by a producer at the huge Japanese advertising company Dentsu. The producer encouraged Obayashi to take his experimental techniques and applied them to directing television commercials. Obayashi took this offer and over the next decade became a prominent director for Dentsu. Obayashi made over 2,000 commercials during his time at the company. These ranged to everything from jewelry, to alcohol, to coffee, to deodorant. Needless to say, most of these are lost to time, but a handful of commercials have managed to survive to this day. These commercials are distinctively Obayashi. They're trippy as hell, fun, energetic, and full of catchy music and imaginative imagery. Even when making advertisements, Obayashi never half-assed his work. It makes me wish that more people put this much effort into their commercials. Dentsu is evidently very fond of using American actors in their commercials, as most of the ones I've found feature them in some capacity. Even big-name actors like Charles Bronson and Kirk Douglas appear in the mix. These wild and entertaining commercials were enough to capture the attention of the folks over at Toho, who were losing money on their recent projects. Toho eventually decided to take a risk on Obayashi because of the talent he showed while working at Dentsu, and the rest is history. Now that we've covered his short films and commercials, it's time to delve into the elusive Obayashi films that I was not able to find for my original video. To be clear, these aren't lost films and the majority of them likely have Japanese releases, but I was unable to find them online with or without English subtitles. One weird thing I've noticed in regards to Obayashi's filmography is that his films get more difficult to find the more recent they are. In my original video, I was able to find most of his films from the 80s, about half of his films from the 90s, and barely any of his films from the early 2000s. Also, fair warning, many of these credits only have titles in Japanese, so I apologize if I butcher the language in my narration. Anyway, we have about 20 credits to get through, so let's get this show on the road. Obayashi's earliest credit for something I couldn't find is actually not a movie, but a TV series. Hito wa Sore wo Scandal to Iu aired in 1978. I can't find a plot synopsis, and Obayashi is credited as directing unknown episodes. We're off to a bad start in terms of information. We at least get a cast list, and we can see from this image that it stars Momoe Yamaguchi, the star of Take Me Away. Obayashi is credited as directing a lot of television movies, but this is the only credit I could find for a television series. I'm not sure if he directed a single episode or a bunch of episodes, but this has me intrigued, especially being so early into Obayashi's professional career. The Legend of Reineko from 1983 has a little bit more information to extract. This is a TV movie that aired on the Tuesday Night Suspense Theater, the same program which aired Cute Devil. I still don't have that much information on the Tuesday Night Suspense Theater other than it apparently aired from 1981 to 2005. Judging from Cute Devil, I'm guessing that it's a horror anthology show in the similar vein as The Twilight Zone, except the episodes are feature-length. The story of The Legend of Reineko follows an actress who is believed to be dead, living alone in an isolated mansion. A struggling screenwriter finds her and is given the job to write her comeback film. The plot makes it sound like this movie is Obayashi's take on Sunset Boulevard. Sunset Boulevard is one of my favorite films, so that sounds awesome to me. Given this aired on the Tuesday Night Suspense Theater, I'm going to assume that this is more of a horror movie than Billy Wilder's film. Either way, my interest is certainly piqued. Also from 1983, Lover Come Back to Me is the first film Obayashi made centering around World War II, predating Bound for the Fields, the Mountains, and the Seacoast by 3 years. The movie follows a Japanese-American GI traveling to Hiroshima to find his sister after World War II. Upon arriving, he meets victims of the bombing who are badly burned. This sounds like a really heavy movie. Interestingly, the letterbox page for Lover Come Back to Me lists the American actor Troy Donahue among the cast. The fact that this is Obayashi's first film about a World War II story makes it a very important landmark in Obayashi's filmography. Given this movie doesn't even have an IMDb page, that leads me to believe this one will be a hard one to track down. Then again, Russian Lullabies didn't have an IMDb page either, so who knows. 1986 was a pretty busy year for Obayashi because he released His Motorbiker Island, Bound for the Fields, the Mountains, and the Seacoast, and a romantic comedy film called April Fish. The only information I could glean from the plot of this one is that it's a story about French cuisine, shooting commercials, and island visitors. The fact that it's about shooting commercials is pretty intriguing to me, as it probably features some self-autobiographical situations that Obayashi experienced while directing commercials in his early career. I've seen the French title for April Fish pop up quite a bit while searching for information about it. Apparently this movie was released in France, likely due to its focus on French cuisine. If you speak French, maybe you'll have an easier time finding subtitles for this film. The Strange Pair is a comedy movie from 1988. The title makes it sound like the movie is a Japanese remake of The Odd Couple. You know, I don't really think of Obayashi as being a comedy director, even though his movies do contain a lot of humor. I guess most of the straight-up comedies he made were the movies that I couldn't find. I wasn't able to find much information on the plot of The Strange Pair itself, but I was able to find information on the plot of the manga that the movie was adapted from, so let's go with that. The manga, entitled Okashina Futari, follows the story of a rich businessman who wants nothing to do with his father's enterprise. He moves into a small rundown apartment and starts a romantic relationship with his neighbor. Obayashi has made some pretty fun manga adaptations looking at the drifting classroom and the visitor in the eye, so I'd really like to see how he does this story justice. Also in 1988, Obayashi released Watashi no Kokoro wa Papa no Mono. Unfortunately, this is yet another movie I couldn't find much information about. If you haven't noticed yet, it's not a good sign when the film doesn't have an English title. It at least has a cast list and a poster, which is more than some of his other entries had, but other than that, nothing. Thankfully, the next film, despite its Japanese title, has a little bit more information to it. Kanojo ga kekkon shinai wake stars a single mother working as a wedding coordinator. Her daughter becomes interested in dating a man, but the mother does not approve, seeing love and marriage as purely business due to her work. This might be Obayashi's first film from the 90s. At least it's his first narrative feature since the only other film released in 1990 was Making of Dreams. I hope one day it becomes available or is at least given an English title so that I don't have to embarrass myself by attempting to pronounce Japanese titles. Turning Point from 1994 is a story about a middle-aged journalist being promoted to her dream job position, only to find out it's not the ideal position she was hoping it was. I've also seen this film listed under the title A Mature Woman. As I stated in my last video, IMDb describes this film as being one of the movies that Obayashi is known for, despite not being able to find it myself. There is a review on Letterboxd from a Japanese speaker who claims that the film has really crazy editing techniques. This could have had an influence on the type of directorial style found in his later work like Sada and The Motive. Turning Point apparently won some awards while doing rounds at festivals, so it was quite well received at the time. It seems like this one could be a real hidden gem. In 1996, Obayashi released Cat Holmes' Deduction. Most sources for this film give the very detailed description of a detective film by Nobuhiko Obayashi made for TV. At least it's better than nothing. The title makes me think of Sherlock Holmes but as a cat. However, since the movie isn't animated from what I can tell, it's likely a mystery about a lost cat or something. Ôbayashi Nobuhiko's seishun kaikoroku from 1997 is a thing that apparently exists. The only person listed under the cast for this movie is Obayashi's wife, Kyoko, so perhaps this is a documentary about Obayashi's family in some capacity. 1998 was the last year that Obayashi decided to have a rapid-fire release schedule of 4 feature films. I covered Sada in my original video, but there was 3 others from that year that I couldn't find. Among those is The Stupid Teacher, another made-for-TV film. It seems that Obayashi released a lot more made-for-television films in his later career. According to the Letterboxd description of The Stupid Teacher, it is considered to be an extra story in the Onomichi trilogy, featuring a self-autobiographical script Obayashi wrote himself. Interestingly enough, it shares the title of one of Obayashi's films he made as a child before his experimental outings in his 20s. The title probably bears a significance to Obayashi if he decided to name it after one of his home movies made as a child. Another interesting factoid is that this movie has a co-director, Tadashi Naito, making it one of the few Obayashi movies where he's not the only director involved. This film seems like a really important one in Obayashi's personal repertoire, so it is definitely one that I hope to find. Also from 1998, I Want to Hear the Wind Song is a true story about hearing-impaired pen pals who eventually meet up in real life, get married, and compete in the triathlon. The story is apparently told in flashbacks as the couple awaits the birth of their child. This sounds like a really fascinating story, and the fact that it's based on true events is even more intriguing. The story of this couple is undoubtedly worth hearing, especially from the perspective of Obayashi. And the final film from 1998 is a television film called Mikeneko Hômuzu no tasogare hoteru. This is another film I don't have much plot information to work with, although we do at least have some crew credits and a runtime. I searched up the title and found a book from 1948 with the same title as the film. The plot of the book reads as follows. Katayama, Harumi, Ishizu, and a cat named Hômuzu are invited to a very prestigious hotel in a secluded place in the mountains. 10 years ago, the owner's daughter was killed when she was playing the piano. All of the people who were there at the time are invited again. Does the tragedy happen again? You know, if this book description is anything like what goes on in the actual film, then it sounds like this could be Obayashi's closest film to House in terms of premise. That really piques my interest. But I don't know, this could potentially be some unrelated story since I couldn't find a direct link. However, I tend to think this is an adaptation since it wasn't the only time that Obayashi adapted a book from this author. More on that later. One Summer's Day from 1999 is another film set in Onomichi. It has also been listed under the alternate title That Guy, which is the worst title ever, and I hope nobody actually calls it that. I found out that One Summer's Day is part of what's known as the Shin Onomichi trilogy, which includes Chizuko's younger sister and Goodbye for Tomorrow as the first two entries. Weird how we released the third entry in the Shin Onomichi trilogy 1 year after The Stupid Teacher, which is considered to be an extra entry in the original Onomichi trilogy. I feel like we're having two different series going on here at once, like Mega Man and Mega Man X. We thankfully get a really detailed plot summary of One Summer's Day. The story is about a boy named Yuta who is sent to keep his grandfather company as the family believes the old man is going senile. A deep bond grows between the two and the grandfather takes Yuta around Onomichi, causing flashbacks to his past which creates a blur between his memory and reality. Now this sounds like a movie within Obayashi's wheelhouse with really cool concepts and themes. I really hope one day I get to complete the Shin Onomichi trilogy and see how it compares overall to the original Onomichi trilogy, as well as its fourth entry. Damn, this is like a math project. Another Obayashi film from 1999 is Yodogawa Nagaharu Monogatari, Kôbe-hen Sainara. The plot for this one says it depicts the life of Yodogawa Nagaharu. How very specific. Yodogawa Nagaharu was a very prominent Japanese film historian and critic who was also a television personality. I looked up a little bit about this guy's biography and he does sound like a very interesting person. I can't even tell if Obayashi's film is a documentary or a biopic, but either way, I'd really like to see how he brings this man's story to the screen. Obayashi's first film in the new millennium is Shinobugawa from the year 2000, another movie without an IMDb page. The Letterboxd page does give a pretty detailed description, thankfully. It is a 1950s period piece about a nameless protagonist falling in love with a waitress in Tokyo and taking her to meet his family in his hometown. The poster for the film states that it's based off of a novel by Miura Tetsuo. It is not the first adaptation of this novel to exist, as in 1972, Toho released a film based off the book, the English title of which is The Long Darkness. I did watch that film in preparation for this video, and it's a very compelling and underrated drama that is both beautiful and tragic. In other words, it's the type of material which is very much up Obayashi's alley. One thing to note is that the runtime for Obayashi's adaptation is 50 minutes, which is an hour and 10 minutes shorter than the original adaptation. I highly recommend the 1972 film, as it's ironically about as obscure as an Obayashi movie, and recommending obscure Japanese movies is kind of what I do. I would be really interested to see Obayashi's take on this story since I enjoyed the original film so much. From 2001 we have Kokubetsu. For this one, I'm going to read the plot description on Letterboxd verbatim. Yuichi Kosaka is a salaried businessman in Ueda City. His achievements have not been improved recently, and he is betrayed by his manager of Takada. Takada, who is related to the company's executives, is very strict with him. Every night late, Yuichi is often dissatisfied with his wife Kazue and his daughter Sane. On the other day, Yuichi ran the car aiming at his home village. However, it is lost in the mountain road which should know well. An old public telephone keeps in sight, and Yuichiro stops the car before it. It was Yuichi who had been able to find the name of his old high school classmate, Tai, in the old telephone book, and dial, which was surprised to hear the voice of the Big. It was because the voice was as it was 30 years ago. The telephone was connected to the past. Beyond that hilarious description, I was also able to find a more cohesive plot description on mydramalist.com. This is the story of a struggling salaryman who visits his hometown to find a telephone booth that allows him to start his life over. The site also says the novel was written by Akagawa Jiro, who was also the writer for the book based on the aforementioned Mikeneko Hômuzu no Tasogare Hoteru that Obayashi directed. This does sound like a fascinating story from either descriptions that taps into many of Obayashi's recurring themes of nostalgia and regret. In 2002, Obayashi released The Last Snow. The title for this movie is based off of a popular Japanese song from the folk musician Iruka, released in 1975. Believe it or not, The Last Snow is the first movie in another spiritual trilogy. So now on top of the Onomichi trilogy, the Shin Onomichi trilogy, and later the Anti-War trilogy, we also have a fourth trilogy known as the Oida trilogy. Someone feel free to count how many times I say trilogy in this video. This trilogy obviously pertains to 3 films set in the Oida prefecture in Japan. The story is of two longtime friends, one whose wife leaves them and the other whose wife is in a coma, coming to each other's aid during their difficult times. Once again, this sounds like a fascinating and touching story, and I'd really like to find out what role the song plays in the movie itself. Also, one of the only images I can find of the movie is one of the actresses naked. How classy. The second entry in the Oida trilogy is Song of Goodbye from 2007. Unfortunately, the descriptions for this movie are once again very poorly translated. Thankfully, one of the reviews on Letterboxd does give a good job at giving an overview of the film. The story involves a man running into the daughter of his now dead first lover and becoming reminded of his past. This is another film in which Obayashi apparently switches between past and present. Obayashi experimented with this type of storytelling a lot in his later career, including movies like Casting Blossoms to the Sky and One Summer's Day. It's a type of storytelling device that lends itself well to Obayashi's themes of nostalgia and loss. Song of Goodbye definitely sounds like a great film for Obayashi's talent. The last film in the Oida trilogy, at least I'm assuming that it is, as it's the last movie before the anti-war trilogy begins, is Scenery to Remember from 2008. I've also seen this movie listed under the title Before That Day. The story is about a woman who finds out she has very little time left to live. She embarks with her husband on a journey to their hometown to reminisce about their lives together and the places they've been, hence the title Scenery to Remember. Beyond the supposed setting of Oida, based on the descriptions of the three films in the Oida trilogy, they all seem to be about middle-aged protagonists dealing with loss and nostalgia. I'm not sure what personal connection Obayashi has to Oida, but something tells me he didn't pick the prefecture at random for these stories. I hope that this film as well as the other two surface with English subtitles because I'm pretty sure they have some scenery worth remembering. See what I did there? And finally, Obayashi's last elusive credit is, for all things, an hour-long music video. The video is called So Long, and it was released in 2013 for the Japanese idol group AKB48. Directing an idol music video may seem like an odd departure for Obayashi, but if you really think about it, it's not as out there as it seems. I think Obayashi had an affinity for idol culture, which is what led him to cast pop idols in his films over the years, including The Island Closest to Heaven, The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, and Shizuka's younger sister. The music video apparently follows a narrative involving a group of high school girls learning to support each other after the events of the 2011 Tohoku tsunami and the 2004 Chuetsu earthquake. The title So Long comes from the title of one of AKB48's singles of the same name. While I wasn't able to find the 60-minute video in its entirety, I was able to find the music video for the titular song. While the music itself is not my thing, the video for the song is very well produced and really makes me want to see the full video. Obayashi uses some of his signature filming techniques in the video, such as the use of green screen and switching between black and white and color for contrast. A lot of Obayashi's movies feel edited like music videos anyway, so he feels right at home in this medium. That about does it for work directed by Obayashi. Even with everything I've covered, there's a good chance there could be a few entries in Obayashi's filmography I have yet to find. There is other work surrounding his legacy, such as film director Nobuhiko Obayashi, His Promise. This is an NHK documentary from 2019 detailing Obayashi's experience shooting and editing his final film, Labyrinth of Cinema. An English trailer for this one surprisingly exists. Big shout out to my friend Uno Afex who helped me track down the movies and the subtitles for the last video and this one. I'll leave a link in the video description to his channel called The Headless Gamer. Swing on by and check out his stuff. Anyway, I've talked plenty about this director by now, and while I'm sure I'll return to the subject eventually, it's time to expand my horizons. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in another video.